Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight is about the COVID crisis in India, a crime against humanity. That's how Indian novelist and political activist Arundhati Roy described the devastating COVID crisis in the country this week. In a scathing essay published by the UK Guardian newspaper, she blamed the deaths of more than 10,000 Indians daily from COVID on the incompetence of the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This was due to his carelessness in enforcing masking and social distancing during political rallies in the run up to the elections ending this Sunday, as well as his refusal to cancel a Hindu festival that brought thousands of people together in close quarters and unmasked for a ritual bath in the Ganga River. Meanwhile, Modi's government has unleashed a successful campaign to muzzle any criticism of its handling of the crisis. Last week, India's IT ministry ordered Twitter to block more than 50 tweets from being seen in the country. Following that, the Times of India reported that Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube had also taken down posts critical of the government. The censorship even extended to WhatsApp and Telegram groups run by Indians trying to help people find medical oxygen and hospital beds. The administrators said they had received threats demanding that they shut down. India has the second highest COVID cases in the world after the United States at 18.4 million. This has put tremendous pressure on the healthcare system, which is experiencing shortages of beds, oxygen tanks, and other essential equipment. The situation prompted the US Embassy in India to warn American citizens that medical care is becoming limited in the country and that US citizens who want to leave India should do so as soon as possible. The US sent $100 million worth of equipment to India this week, and President Joe Biden has promised more help. In related news, 5 cases of the Indian variant of COVID has been identified in Turkey. The cases, all found in the city of Istanbul, are currently isolated and under observation. The news comes as the country's infection rates soar, and it entered into its first national coronavirus lockdown yesterday. Currently, Turkey has the highest number of COVID cases in Europe. The lockdown will last through the rest of Ramadan and the Eid al-Fitr holidays. It's scheduled to end on May 17th. The lockdown also comes as the country faces expected delays in its vaccine rollout, according to Health Minister Farhattin Koca. To counter this, Koca says that the government will space out the 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. They'll be administered 6 to 8 weeks apart instead of the current interval of 28 days. Here at home, the US Senate overwhelmingly approved the first major infrastructure bill to upgrade the country's drinking and wastewater systems yesterday. The $35 billion Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act passed on a bipartisan 89-2 votes. The only 2 senators to vote against the bill were Republicans, Mike Lee of Utah and Ted Cruz of Texas. The vote reflected rare bipartisan unity as legislators remain divided over other infrastructure investments. Democrats hope the move will move President Joe Biden's $2 trillion American Jobs Plan forward. This is aimed at transforming the US into a clean energy economy. Republicans were pleased, they say, because it reflects legislation focused on more traditional infrastructure investments. The US Supreme Court sided with an undocumented immigrant challenging deportation yesterday, offering new hope to thousands like him. In a 6-3 ruling that blamed the federal government for improperly notifying Augusto Nis Chavez to appear for a removal hearing, judges overturned a lower court's decision that had prevented the immigrant from Guatemala from pursuing his request to cancel the attempted expulsion based on the length of the time he had been living in the United States. Nis Chavez lives in Michigan with his family after entering the US illegally in 2005. The Supreme Court judges decided that based on a federal immigration law, authorities must include all relevant details for a notice to appear for a hearing in one document. In Nis Chavez's case, information was sent across multiple documents. While the ruling is a technicality, it could affect hundreds and thousands of immigration cases. The ruling flies in the face of years of practice by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The U.S. president election may have been over 5 months ago, but the GOP has not ended its refusal to undermine its results. This time, Arizona Senate Republicans are auditing the vote. They took ballots and voting equipment from Maricopa County and turned them over to cyber ninjas. The organization is a private contractor whose chief executive continues to claim that the November election was fraudulent. The audit grew out of Republican legislators' desire to overturn the presidential election results in Arizona. After more than 20 Republican lawsuits failed, Senate Republicans successfully subpoenaed Maricopa County's ballots and ballot counting machines for an outside audit. Senate leaders said that they were responding to thousands of questions about the election from constituents. This is despite the fact that election results and the accuracy of the ballot counting machines have been affirmed by Maricopa County's internal and external audits. Scientists have found that the virus causing COVID-19 creates long-lasting changes to genes in patients' airway cells. Researchers at Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center revealed that the tiny spikes in coronavirus cells leading to COVID infection cut into patients' cells and hijack their functions. Once that happens, the virus releases its own genetic material into the cells so it can be copied. The results reveal differences in gene expression, which remained in the cells even after the infection had passed. The genes were most affected included those controlling the body's inflammatory response. The study's authors now plan to use the approach to examine how long these genetic changes last. They also hope to find out what other long-term consequences COVID infection will have on a patient's health. One of the Louisville police officers accused in the killing of Breonna Taylor last year is now trying to profit off of her death through book sales. Jonathan Mattingly is releasing a new book with a Christian publisher. Post Hill Press specializes in Christian titles, but there's nothing Christ-like about cashing in on the death of an innocent Black woman in her own home. In March last year, Mattingly, along with officers Brett Hackison and Miles Cosgrove, who were all white, forced entry into Taylor's apartment. They then allegedly shot and killed the 26-year-old African-American EMT in her own home. Last September, the city of Louisville agreed to pay Taylor's family $12 million and reform police practices. Democratic Kentucky State Representative Attica Scott said on Twitter that people love to profit off Black pain and tragedy. It sells. Mattingly's book is called The Fight for Truth, but his take on the truth will remain unknown until the book is released this fall. He's refused all media interviews until then. Simon & Schuster, which distributes book for Post Hill Press, announced that it will not distribute Mattingly's book, but Post Hill has doubled down and plans to release the title anyway. A halal taco truck in Southern California serving more than food as it joins the fight against COVID. Its owner, Rida Hamida, has joined and organized mobile vaccination sites during Ramadan at local mosques. After sunset, she feeds and helps vaccinate Muslims at mosques in Orange County. Vaccinations are rewarded with free tacos. Hamida started the Halal Taco Truck as a way to unite Muslims and Latinos across Southern California. She has used it in the past to mobilize people to fill out the census and register to vote as well. Israeli bombing of Gaza is so routine it hardly gets reported. It's always the Palestinians' fault as far as Israel is concerned. More on this by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
Human Rights Watch accuses Israel of apartheid and crimes against humanity. The newly released report also states that Palestinian armed groups committed war crimes, including indiscriminate rocket attacks fired towards Israeli population centers. The report, however, states that Israel's attacks have went far beyond striking those responsible. Israeli bombing has killed thousands, and their attacks have destroyed critical infrastructure, including homes, hospitals, and schools. The 2014 hostilities alone completely destroyed or damaged about 18,000 residential units belonging to Palestinians. It has left more than 100,000 people without a home, according to Israeli NGO B'Tselem.
The Night of Power. What is the Night of Power? This is a special night of Ramadan, and Muslims around the world look for it. It's not only powerful, but mysterious as well. More from Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
The last 10 days of Ramadan is a special time for all Muslims around the world. It is a time when Muslims make an effort to worship more as the holy month of Ramadan comes to an end. For example, Muslims do more charity as Ramadan is leaving. There's a chapter in the Quran named after the Night of Power. In Arabic, this chapter is called Laylatul Qadr. South Asians call this Shabi Qadr. In Islamic faith, the night of Laylatul Qadr is considered more significant than 1,000 months. There is also some mystery that comes with the night of Laylatul Qadr. For instance, no one knows on which of the last 10 nights does Laylatul Qadr fall on. This mystery encourages Muslims to worship more on each of the last 10 days of Ramadan. Muslims especially feel motivated to do more good on those odd nights of the last 10 days. Many believe the 27th night of Ramadan is the night of power. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was known to pitch a tent in the mosque and completely devote himself to worship. Many Muslims around the world do the same. This is the power of Laylatul Qadr.
After these excellent reports, coming up next is our in-depth analysis segment. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages.
So it's nothing extraordinary what we do. It's just a human to human, like brothers to brothers and sisters to sisters. Nothing else, nothing more.
Friends, our world is pulling together like never before. We're making huge sacrifices to keep one another safe. Scientists are working non-stop to develop COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A vaccine will get our economies moving. It will tell our loved ones we're safe again. But we have challenges we must address. Right now, huge pharmaceutical companies are keeping the vaccine research a secret. They're deciding how many vaccines get made, how much to charge for them, and who gets vaccinated. This will no doubt leave billions of people behind. Pharma companies are putting profit, not people, first. Yet, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is funding their work. We cannot let the CEOs of a handful of pharmaceutical companies decide our future. We need a vaccine that everyone can have free of charge, no matter where you live or whether you're rich or you're poor. We need companies to share all their research so we can make enough safe vaccines for everyone. We need a vaccine owned by all of us. To end this COVID-19 pandemic, we need to pull together once more.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, walking up and down the world's largest refugee camps. I met Sister Fatima. Well, I'm calling her a sister. She was just a teenage girl, my granddaughter's age. Her parents were slaughtered by the Burmese military, and she was dragged by the Burmese soldiers to their hut, and all night long she was violated. She lost consciousness. When she regained, and in the morning and soldiers were themselves away, she ran and hid in a vegetable patch. Some people saw her, gave her clothes, and took her 4-day-long walk to Bangladesh. Who will speak up for her? Who will stand up for her if not you and I? It's our responsibility. It's our duty, brothers and sisters in humanity. And that's why I like you to support Burma Task Force. I'm a volunteer for it. But Burma Task Force is standing up to stop this genocide, violation of our sisters. You and I are free, they are not. Please stand up, work with Burma Task Force, and donate today to Burma Task Force. Together, we can do it. Assalamu alaikum.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. US President Joe Biden has decided to finally pull America out of Afghanistan. The Taliban backed out of the Istanbul conference a couple of days before Biden's announcement. In the meantime, the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan reports close to 1,800 civilian casualties, a 29% increase compared to the same period in 2020. Can there be a Afghan peace process without the Taliban? What is the future of this process? To discuss this in detail, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. The US is pulling out of Afghanistan. That news has been around, but now US is deploying more forces actually to defend those who are withdrawing. Today, United States ordered all the unnecessary embassy staff in Afghanistan to leave the country. Peace process with Taliban, unfortunately, has broken down. They refused to attend the meeting. So what's happening there? And at the same time, the civilian casualties are rising. To discuss this and other Afghan situation during this critical time when some people are already comparing Afghanistan withdrawal to the withdrawn US withdrawal from the Vietnam, it may or may not be correct. And to discuss with us is from Wilson Center, Michael Kugelman is the Deputy Director of Afghan Program at the Wilson Center. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here with you.
Why the peace process has broken down with Taliban? They recently refused to attend the meeting.
Well, the Taliban has had a very consistent position that all US troops must be out of Afghanistan by May 1st. And of course, that was a stipulation and an agreement that the Taliban had signed with the US government more than a year ago in February 2020. So now that the Biden administration has announced its withdrawal plans, which call for US forces to start leaving Afghanistan by May 1st, but not to be completing that withdrawal until September 11th, that has made the Taliban very unhappy, and it was essentially said that it's not willing to participate in any type of peace conference or really any type of peace activity in Afghanistan until every U.S. troop has left the country. So that's, at least at this point in time, this is why the Taliban has declined to participate in this peace conference in Turkey, and also why it has threatened to stage attacks on U.S. forces that are still in Afghanistan after May 1st.
Well, then it means that May 1st is going to even accelerate all the attacks and everything?
Well, it's unclear. Some would argue, and I would argue this as well, that the Taliban would be much more likely to attack U.S. forces in Afghanistan if there is no clear date when U.S. forces would be gone. So if the Biden administration had simply said, well, we're not ready to leave Afghanistan yet, we'll wait until the job is done or something like that, that definitely would have made it much more likely that the Taliban would stage attacks on U.S. forces. But the fact that President Biden has said specifically that all U.S. forces will be gone by September 11th, at least the Taliban knows that the U.S. is on its way out. But keep in mind here, the operative point is that the agreement that the Taliban signed with the U.S., it obliged the U.S. forces to leave by May 1st, but it also entailed the Taliban agreeing to stop staging attacks on U.S. forces. And so for more than a year, there has not been one American soldier that's been killed by the Taliban in Afghanistan. So, and the Taliban has suggested that if the U.S. overstays the May 1st deadline, then it essentially has violated the agreement, making the agreement null and void, and that then gives the Taliban the excuse to start staging attacks on U.S. forces again. So it's very complicated, but very troubling.
President Trump wanted it to happen by May 1st, and he faced some challenges from the military personnel. And the same military people probably told Biden not to do that. So do you think Taliban will be somewhat charitable on that situation?
No, I don't expect the Taliban to be charitable. Though, as I said, I think that it's less likely to stage violent actions against U.S. forces just because it knows that they are on their way out. And in fact, the Biden administration initially said that all troops would be gone by September 11th, but more recent reports have indicated that perhaps by July 4th, the U.S. Independence Day, that all U.S. troops would be gone. But there's been a lot of attempts by the United States, and I believe also by Pakistan and other key players, to try to ensure that the Taliban keeps the violence down and agrees not to go after U.S. forces. But as you said in the introduction, I think that given what's happening, given what the U.S. is doing now, I think there's a lot of concern in Washington that its troops will be attacked. The fact that you're sending almost 700 new U.S. forces to Afghanistan to protect those that are leaving, and that includes a number of new gunships, an aircraft carrier is going to be deployed into the Persian Gulf to be on standby in case there's a need for more capacity to deploy airships. And indeed, the embassy is essentially sending all non-essential employees out. That all tells me that there's a strong expectation in Washington that the Taliban will not be charitable and will be quite likely to try to go after U.S. forces in Afghanistan.
Is there any communication at this moment between American government and Taliban? Is Zalmay Khalilzad still shuttling between the two countries?
Absolutely. Ambassador Khalilzad has essentially been camped out in the region from his base in Doha, but he's made a number of trips to Afghanistan and to Pakistan since the Biden administration took office. He has been in Washington the last few days. He was on Capitol Hill giving testimony to Congress on Tuesday. But I think that he will continue to be, for the immediate future, very active in diplomatic efforts with the Taliban and with the Afghan government to try to keep them focused on staying committed to the peace process. even though both the Taliban and the Afghan government have reason to be unhappy with the United States, the Taliban because US forces will not leave on May 1st, and the Afghan government is unhappy because US forces are leaving, even if it's a few months after May 1st. So yeah, I think that for now, so long as US troops are still in the country, I think that Khalilzad and others will be very active behind the scenes, also publicly, trying to push both sides, the Afghan government and the Taliban, to remain committed to the peace process. The big question is what happens after the last US soldier has left Afghanistan, whether that's July or September. What does that then mean for US policy? Now, the administration suggests it'll continue to be involved diplomatically, supporting the peace process, but it may be very difficult for the US to have a diplomatic role in the peace process when there's no longer any security forces there. And the embassy probably won't feel safe. Diplomats on the ground are not going to be very comfortable given the security risks. So I think all bets could be off after US forces have left Afghanistan.
Why civilian casualties are already going up?
Yeah, this is one of the many tragedies of Afghanistan. Indeed, what we've seen over the last few years, and ironically, since this broader peace and reconciliation process began, is that the Taliban has intensified its operations on the battlefield. This has led to more civilian casualties. The Afghan government, the Afghan military has also stepped up its activities to try to go after the Taliban. That's led to civilian casualties. You've also had non-Taliban units, militias, that are connected to the Afghan government and to the US that have been engaging in actions that have caused civilian casualties as well. The main reason why we've seen this upsurge in violence and battlefield activities that's led to civilian casualties is that everyone wants to strengthen their bargaining position in negotiations. Each side wants the other to feel weak and concerned and in a position to make concessions to the other. But at the end of the day, it's the Taliban that has the upper hand. It thinks it's winning the war. It's taken over more territory than it has in any other time during the war. Afghan forces are on the defensive. You've had cases of Afghan soldiers actually abandoning their posts. There have even been some cases of Afghan soldiers joining the Taliban. So the Taliban has all the leverage, unfortunately.
How long do you think the Afghan forces, which has been trained by the United States and armed for the last 20 years, how long do you expect them to survive Taliban?
Well, the conventional wisdom, which I think is accurate, is that so long as the US and the broader international community continue to provide financial support to the Afghan security forces, that they'll hold it together. They certainly have enjoyed improvements in battlefield capacity over the last few years, really over the last decade or so, because of training and advising mission from NATO. There are significant major constraints, particularly in the realm of air power, airstrike capacity. That's something that there's really been a strong dependence on the US for. But that said, I think that these nightmare scenarios about the Afghan military fracturing or falling apart, I think that's unlikely as long as the financing keeps coming in. And to emphasize, the Afghan states, including the Afghan security forces, are heavily dependent on international support. So, so long as soldiers keep getting their salaries, which in most cases are funded by the international community, as long as you have that morale in place, as long as weapons continue to be paid for, costs can be maintained through international support, that should keep the Afghan security forces together. But if the US were to cut or to sever or even reduce financial support to the Afghan security forces, that's when I think you have to worry about the possibility of a total collapse.
So do you think there is appetite in the alliance forces to continue to fund Afghanistan army while they're losing to Taliban?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's already been donor fatigue over the last few years as donors have seen the situation in Afghanistan go from bad to worse, despite all of this funding coming in. Because as you mentioned, the Taliban has been performing so well on the battlefield and has been able to prevail in many contexts, particularly in terms of taking over territory. And I think that, as I said earlier, it's going to be very difficult for the international community to manage large inflows of aid in and within the country if you don't have a security presence on the ground. I mean, the U.S. government has said the only security presence that will be on the ground are personnel to protect the embassy, and that's it. So I think it's unrealistic to think that current aid levels will be maintained once U.S. forces have left. But I do think in the immediate term, the U.S. and probably many of its NATO partners will continue to provide some level of financial support. It's just not clear exactly how much.
Do you see any possible scenario, Michael, in which United States changes its decision and say, no, we need to have more forces there?
Yeah, it's a great question because there have been other U.S. presidents that have said they're prepared to leave and they end up not leaving. But I do think this is a final withdrawal. President Biden has never been comfortable with staying in Afghanistan. But I do think there is one potential scenario under which U.S. forces could return to Afghanistan. And that scenario would not be one in which the Taliban is doing increasingly well and threatens to take over the government. I think the scenario that would lead to a potential return of U.S. forces is if U.S. Officials conclude that there is a terrorism threat emanating from Afghanistan that poses a clear and direct threat to U.S. interests and personnel outside of Afghanistan, including in the United States itself. So in other words, if the U.S. concludes that the very reason for its decision to pull out, which is basically the fact that there's not a sufficient terrorism threat to oblige you to stay, if that no longer applies and the U.S. concludes that the threat of international terrorism has become serious again, that could compel the administration to send a small number of counterterrorism forces back. Now, of course, the Taliban would not accept that, which would cause additional complications. But I think that in the absence of a peace agreement, which is unlikely anytime soon, I think that you can't rule out that possibility of a stepped up terrorism threat compelling U.S. forces to return. That said, I do think that we shouldn't overstate the potential threat of international terrorism even after U.S. forces have left, because it's very different in Afghanistan now than it was in 2001. Al-Qaeda is not as strong as it used to be. Daesh is there and it's resilient, but it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't have the capacity to plan and mount attacks far away from Afghanistan. At least the ISIS faction in Afghanistan doesn't have that capacity.
But don't you think the terrorism label has been relatively flexible where you apply, when you apply, how you apply? Whole lot of variables go in deciding that. So Pakistani Taliban are allied with the Taliban, right? That's how they came into being. Is this a terrorist group? Is Taliban going to support them? If Taliban are going to support them and they're operating on a bigger spectrum, or some of the Taliban, some of those people are trying to do things in the Central Asia. So don't you think that particular definition might create more complexity instead of resolve it?
Well, you're right. I think that a good term to describe the terrorism state of affairs in Afghanistan and the broader region is fluid. You've got a lot of different regional militant organizations that are floating around, and most of them draw on local recruits, but there are also a number of foreign militants that are affiliated with and members of these groups. And I think that as you suggest, a group like the Pakistani Taliban is it's allied with the Afghan Taliban. It's also allied with Al-Qaeda. So I think that you've got this large network of alliances between different terror groups, both international and local. The odd one out is ISIS. It's a rival of all of these groups because it's a rival of Al-Qaeda's because of a dispute that arose many years ago. Is an interesting story that you had a new chapter of Al-Qaeda called Al-Qaeda of Iraq, but it split off from Al-Qaeda Central because of disagreements about how much violence was justifiable to use. And then Al-Qaeda of Iraq became ISIS. So ISIS is sort of the odd guy out, so to speak. But indeed, I think that once U.S. forces have left, once the full NATO mission has left, you're going to have more violence, more Taliban advances. And even though the Taliban is an enemy of ISIS, that certainly could give these lawless spaces and all this chaos could create a conducive environment for ISIS to build itself out and be able to develop bastions. I don't want to overstate that, but it's certainly true. And the Pakistani Taliban has been resurgent. It's had its base in Afghanistan for several years now, but it's been able to reunite some splinter factions. It poses a threat. You've got at least several thousand Pakistani Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. And it's definitely true that we should not be complacent moving forward about the terrorism threat in Afghanistan.
Now, President Arif Alvi of Pakistan a couple of days ago told Voice of America that his country does not want to become base for the US counterterrorism operation, implying about the future of Afghanistan. Do you think that there are at this moment US bases in Pakistan? And do you think Pakistan will be asking those bases to be vacated?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the official word is that all the U.S. military personnel, including U.S. intelligence, present in Pakistan left a number of years ago. Most of them after the Raymond Davis affair of 2011, which, as you'll recall, was this incident when a CIA contractor shot and killed 2 Pakistani men in Lahore. The relationship fell apart. Much of the U.S. military presence, including the intelligence presence, subsided. But who really knows, right? I mean, who knows? I mean, you had
I thought you know.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I thought you knew.
No, I mean, I was going to say I could speculate that you continue to have some, though not many, U.S. Drone strikes carried out in the region. Fewer and fewer as the last few years have gone by, but those have continued beyond when formally, officially, all U.S. military personnel left. So I really don't know what's going on now, but I do think that there is definitely a possibility that the U.S. could try to work out an arrangement with Pakistan where the U.S. can base some type of modest military contingent at one or more Pakistani military bases in order to enable it to maintain a counterterrorism capacity vis-a-vis Afghanistan, just because it's not going to base any troops at all in Afghanistan. There are other possibilities. Uzbekistan has been mentioned as a possibility. The thing about Uzbekistan and Pakistan is that there's a precedent. In both cases, both countries have previously housed U.S. Military personnel there. Now that's an open secret. It's not even a secret. It's public knowledge. And when the U.S. was in the height of the drone war some years ago, it was using bases in Baluchistan, the Shamsi air base there, to load drones and send them out. So one can't rule out the possibility that the U.S. will try to work out an arrangement again. I mean, you're right that the public word from Pakistan is that it is not interested in housing U.S. troops. I believe General Bajwa may have said something to that effect as well. But nothing can be ruled out. And the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is a transactional one, and it's security assistance, or trying to focus on ensuring that India does not develop a deeper presence in Afghanistan. Maybe that would make Pakistan more willing to house U.S. forces, but obviously it would be very controversial politically. It would be real dynamite, so to speak. No political leadership or military leadership in Pakistan would want the public to know that it's allowing U.S. forces to be based in the country. But of course, these things are meant to be secret, but eventually the word gets out. So it would be very risky for Pakistan to do that.
Is U.S. looking for bases in India if Pakistan does not want to work?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is a possibility. That's on some levels would be a logical place to look, because obviously the U.S. has a strong relationship with India, but the logistics, the geography, or the location, India's geography could make that difficult, because I think that the U.S. would need overflight permissions from Pakistan, because it will be flying military equipment or whatever the case over Pakistani soil. That would be a very controversial thing for Pakistan to let the U.S. do. But indeed, I think that we can't rule out that possibility. And I think India makes more sense than, say, a U.S. base in the Middle East, which is so much further away. That's been described as another possibility, that the U.S. could use some of its many military infrastructure in the Gulf, in the Arab Gulf region, to house a counterterrorism force. But that's a bit far away. India's a lot closer. But again, given that it would need those overflight rights from Pakistan, which it may not be willing to provide, I'm not sure that would be viable.
Tell me, are the Taliban of today any different than Taliban of the day when we started bombing them?
This is another great question, and it depends on the perspective. There's some that are optimistic and say, well, look, you've got new generations of Talibs that have come of age more recently, and they are more open to this idea of being moderate and things like that. And these people that make that argument will point to the fact that the new breed of Taliban leadership own cell phones and they take selfies. And they engage with foreign media. They speak to women journalists and so on and so forth. That may be true, but I think that's a bit superficial. I think what you have to look at is what is happening in areas of Afghanistan that the Taliban controls. And to the extent that we know, it does seem that it's not quite the governance structures and tactics that the Taliban uses are not as draconian as they had been in the late 1990s, but still, it sounds like it's very difficult for women to be out in public. There are limitations in terms of what they can do. The Taliban has permitted girls to go to school in these areas that they control. But you also hear stories about the use of force against those that have stolen things and that type of thing. This is very troubling, and the Taliban has been very vague about what it would be willing to support in a post-war government. It's been very vague. All it says is that we support the rights of women, we support all this and that, so long as it comes within the realm of Islamic law, of religious law. But it never specifies what it means by that. So I think we have to be skeptical. Maybe the Taliban has changed, maybe it's become a bit more moderate, but I think ideologically it still is wedded to this very strict draconian interpretation of religious law and religious scripture.
Well, thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Back to you, Hena, in the Washington Bureau.
Thank you, Mr. Kugelman and Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Keep watching Muslim Network TV. For more, visit our website, muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.
Special thanks to our official supporter, Zagat Foundation of America.